I stood on my own front porch with a suitcase at my feet and cold rain soaking through my jacket when my stepson changed the locks and shouted through the door, "Find somewhere else to die, Frank. You're useless now." For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Grief does strange things to your ears. It distorts the world. But then the deadbolt clicked again, slow, deliberate, and I knew I'd heard every word just fine. The porch light was still the one I'd installed last summer. I remembered standing on a ladder in the heat, Marjorie holding the flashlight below, teasing me about my knees going bad. Now the light buzzed faintly, throwing a pale yellow circle around my shoes like a spotlight I hadn't asked for. "Evan," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I meant. "Let's just talk." The door cracked open an inch. I caught a glimpse of his face tight, smile, eyes flat. 41 years old, dressed like he was heading to a business lunch instead of kicking his stepfather out of the house he'd lived in for 25 years. "You don't live here anymore," he said. "Mom made sure of that." Then he did something that still makes my chest ache when I think about it. He reached down inside the entryway and picked up a small cardboard box. Marjorie's box. The one she kept on the hall table. Inside were her handwritten recipe cards, yellowed at the edges, and a handful of old photos, our wedding at the courthouse in Joliet, a Thanksgiving from years ago, when Evan still smiled in pictures. Evan looked at the box, then at me, and dropped it into the trash can by the door. The lid clanged shut. I felt something tear loose inside my chest, sharp and sudden. I stepped forward without thinking, rain splashing up the cuffs of my jeans. "That was your mother's," I said. "She's dead," he snapped, "and you're not my family." The door slammed shut. The lock turned, and that was it. I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough for old Mr. O'Rourke from next door to crack his curtain and then step out onto his own porch pretending to check his mail. "Frank," he called softly, "this ain't right." I nodded because if I opened my mouth, I might have said something I couldn't take back. Or worse, I might have begged. I bent down and pulled the box out of the trash. The bottom was damp, but the cards were still there. Marjorie's handwriting, neat, careful, a little slanted to the right. Meatloaf, chicken soup, apple pie with a note in the margin, "Frank likes extra cinnamon." My hands were shaking as I set the box in the back of the truck. The truck was hers. A beat-up Ford F-150 she refused to give up even after retirement. "It still runs," she'd always say. So do I. I climbed into the driver's seat and just sat there staring at the house. Our house. The one we painted together. The one where I fixed the leaky sink and replaced the roof and paid the property taxes every year like clockwork. The rain blurred everything. Marjorie had been gone 3 weeks. A stroke. Sudden. No warning. One minute we were arguing about whether we needed a new dishwasher. The next, I was holding her hand in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee, listening to machines slow down and then stop. At the time, Evan had seemed normal, distant but polite. He hugged me stiffly at the funeral, thanked me for taking care of things. I thought grief was making him awkward. I was wrong. I drove until the neighborhood faded behind me and the familiar stretch of Route 30 opened up. The motel near the highway had a flickering sign and a parking lot full of pickup trucks. It wasn't much, but it was dry. Inside the room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the folder I'd carried with me from the house, insurance papers, hospital bills, bank statements. The boring stuff of a life that had ended without asking my permission. I flipped through it slowly, the way Marjorie always did. She was big on reading the fine print. I wasn't. I trusted her to handle that side of things. A memory surfaced, then uninvited. We'd been sitting at the kitchen table not long before she died. Papers spread out. She'd taken off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, a habit she had when something didn't sit right. "Frank," she'd said very calmly, "if something ever happens to me, promise me one thing." "What's that?" I'd asked, half listening, focused on my coffee. Read everything she said. "Don't trust what things look like at first glance. Promise me." I'd smiled and squeezed her hand. "I promise." At the time, it felt like nothing. Now it felt like a rope tossed into deep water. Back in the motel room, I kept flipping pages until something slipped out of the folder and landed on the bed. A single sheet of paper, cream-colored, typed. At the top in Marjorie's handwriting was one short line. Section 9 read twice. I stared at it, my heart picking up speed for the first time since the porch. Outside, a truck roared past on the highway. The motel sign buzzed, And for the first time since Evan slammed that door, I didn't feel completely helpless. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm heart already racing, like I'd missed something important. The motel room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant whoosh of trucks on the highway. I lay there staring at the ceiling, Marjorie's words looping in my head. Read everything. Don't trust what things look like. I showered, put on my one clean button-down, and drove to the Denny's down the road. It was the same one we used to stop at after visiting her sister in Kankakee. The smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon wrapped around me like a memory I hadn't asked for. I ordered eggs I barely touched and spread the papers out on the table. Hospital bills, life insurance forms, bank statements. All of it looked like noise. Legal language that blurred together if you stared too long. And there it was again. That single sheet, Section 9, read twice. I didn't understand it. Not really. But I folded it carefully and slid it back into the folder the way Marjorie used to do when something mattered. The law office was in an older brick building in Joliet, tucked between a dentist and a real estate agency. The sign read Harlan and Beck, attorneys at law. The letters faded but solid. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Evan was already there. He sat with his ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling on his phone, wearing a tailored jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage used to be. He looked up when I walked in and smirked. "Didn't think you'd show," he said. "I was told to be here," I replied, keeping my voice even. He shrugged. "Guess it's good to see things through." Thomas Beck came out a moment later. Late 50s, thin gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He shook Evan's hand first, then turned to me. "Frank Dalton," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I said. And for the first time since the funeral, I believed someone meant it. We sat at a long conference table. Papers were stacked neatly in front of Beck. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Let's begin." He started with the formalities, dates, names, witnesses, the legal confirmation that Marjorie's will was valid and properly executed. My stomach tightened with every sentence. Then came the part Evan had been waiting for. Under the terms of the will, Beck said the primary residence and the bulk of the estate assets are designated to Evan Pierce. Evan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands behind his head. He glanced at me, a satisfied smile tugging at his mouth. "There it is," he said. "Told you." I felt the words like a punch to the ribs. 25 years of marriage reduced to a sentence read out loud. Beck continued, his tone steady. "The total value of the estate, including investment accounts and liquid assets, is approximately $27.5 million. Evan let out a low whistle. Not bad. I stared down at the table, my ears ringing. For a split second, I considered standing up and walking out. Let Evan have it all. Let him have the house, the money, the memories. I was tired. Beck went on. Frank Dalton is allocated transitional living assistance and access to certain personal effects as outlined here. Evan laughed, not loud, just enough. Transitional, he repeated. That's generous. Something hot flared in my chest, but it burned out just as quickly. I reminded myself of the paper in my folder, of Marjorie's voice. Read everything. When Beck finished reading the initial sections, he stacked the papers neatly and paused. Evan stood. So that's it, right? I'll have my people coordinate the property transfer. Beck didn't stand. He didn't even look at Evan. Instead, he took off his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth, and set them back on his nose. Mr. Pierce, he said calmly, before we proceed, there is an additional section of the will we haven't discussed. Evan scoffed. If it's about furniture, you can keep it. I don't need. I'd suggest you sit down, Beck said. The room went very still. Evan hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into the chair. His confidence didn't vanish, but it flickered. Beck slid another set of papers forward. Did you happen to read Section 9 of your mother's will, he asked. Evan blinked. I read what mattered. Beck smiled faintly, not a friendly smile. I recommend you listen carefully to the next part, he said. My heart began to pound slow and heavy like footsteps coming down a long hallway. Evan straightened in his chair, the smirk still hanging on his face like armor. He didn't realize it already cracked. Just read it, he said. Let's get this over with. Thomas Beck didn't answer right away. He flipped a page, then another. The paper made a soft, deliberate sound in the quiet room. Instead of reading, he looked at Evan and asked one simple question. Did you actually read Section 9? The color drained from Evan's face so fast it startled even me. I told you, Evan said, a sharp edge creeping into his voice. I read the will. Beck nodded slowly as if he'd expected that answer. He turned slightly in his chair and finally looked at me. Frank, he said, this part concerns you directly. I want to explain it clearly. My mouth was dry. I nodded. Beck folded his hands on the table. Section 9 establishes what's known as a life estate. Evan snorted. What does that even mean? It means, Beck said calmly, that while you hold title to the property, Frank Dalton has the legal right to live in that house for the rest of his life. The room seemed to tilt. Evan laughed, but it came out wrong. That's not no. That can't be right. My name's on the deed. Yes, Beck said, and Frank's right is attached to it. You cannot sell the house. You cannot refinance it. You cannot force him out. Not now. Not ever. Not without his written consent. I felt my pulse in my ears. Images flashed through my mind, Evan slamming the door of the trash can, the rain on the porch. The house was still mine. Not on paper the way Evan understood ownership, but in the only way that mattered. Evan pushed his chair back. This is a joke. Beck didn't react. It's very common, actually. Your mother was thorough. Evan looked at me, then really looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. You knew about this, he demanded. I shook my head. No. That seemed to make it worse. Beck continued, his voice steady, patient, like a man used to delivering news people didn't want to hear. Section 9 also addresses the trust. Evan stiffened. What about it? The $27.5 million is held in a trust, Beck said. You are the beneficiary. Evan exhaled loudly. Good. But Frank Dalton, Beck went on, is the trustee. Silence dropped into the room like a heavy coat. Evan stared at Beck, then at me. Say that again. Frank manages the trust, Beck said. All distributions, all approvals. That's impossible, Evan snapped. I'm his son. Stepson, Beck corrected gently. And this was your mother's decision. Evan's jaw worked as if he were chewing something bitter. So what I have to ask him for my own money? You receive a monthly distribution, Beck said. A fixed amount for regular living expenses. And the rest, Evan asked. Beck slid the paper toward him. Larger withdrawals are limited to health, education, maintenance, and support. In plain English, reasonable needs. Frank determines what qualifies. I felt something twist inside me, a mix of awe and fear. Marjorie had done this, quietly, carefully. She'd put me between Evan and the money, not as punishment, but as a filter. Evan leaned forward, hands flat on the table. This is ridiculous. He can't control my life. Beck met his eyes. He doesn't control your life. He controls access to the trust. Evan turned on me, then his voice low and dangerous. You're enjoying this. I wasn't, not the way he meant. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to apologize. Mostly I was scared, because I knew Evan. I'd seen the way he reacted when things didn't go his way. Beck cleared his throat. There's one more component to Section 9. Evan let out a harsh breath. Of course there is. Beck tapped the page with his finger. A forfeiture clause. Evan froze. Any attempt to harass, intimidate, or legally undermine the trustee, Beck said, results in suspension of discretionary distributions. Evan's voice came out thin. You're saying if I push back, I lose access to my own inheritance? Yes, Beck said simply. Evan stood so abruptly his chair screeched across the floor. This is insane. You expect me to just be polite? I expect you, Beck said, to follow your mother's wishes. Evan laughed sharp and ugly. She wouldn't have done this. Beck didn't raise his voice. She did. I remembered Marjorie at the kitchen table, glasses off, reading line by line. I remembered her saying Evan was smart but careless, that he skimmed, that he assumed. Evan grabbed the papers, flipping through them wildly, as if the words might rearrange themselves if he stared hard enough. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. You can't just... Evan, Beck said firmer now, this meeting is not a negotiation. Evan looked at me again, his eyes dark. You think you won something? I swallowed. I think your mother wanted peace. He scoffed. Then she chose the wrong person. He stormed out without another word, the door slamming behind him. The silence afterward was loud. Beck gathered the papers calmly. I know this is a lot, he said to me, but legally your position is solid. I nodded, my hand still trembling. As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A voicemail notification. Unknown number. That night back at the motel, I listened to the message. Evan's voice came through low and tight. "You're gonna regret this, Frank," he said. "I promise you that." I sat on the edge of the bed phone in my hand, and for the first time since Marjorie died, I understood what she'd really left me. Not money, responsibility, and a storm that wasn't done breaking. I didn't sleep much that night, but it wasn't the same kind of sleeplessness I'd had since Marjorie died. This time my mind wasn't just replaying memories. It was working. The motel room was quiet except for the ice machine clanking somewhere down the hall and the low hum of traffic outside. I lay there staring at the ceiling, Evan's voice from the voicemail echoing in my head. "You're gonna regret this." By morning, I'd made a decision. If Evan was going to push, I wasn't going to sit still. I showered, shaved, and drove back onto Route 30. The sky was a dull Midwestern gray, the kind that presses down on you. I stopped at the same Denny's as the day before, ordered black coffee, and pulled Marjorie's folder back out. This time I didn't rush. I read every page the way she used to, slow, deliberate finger tracking the lines. It felt strange, almost like she was sitting across from me watching to make sure I didn't skim. That's when I noticed it. At the back of the folder, tucked into a plastic sleeve, was a small white envelope I hadn't seen before. No stamp, just my name written in Marjorie's careful handwriting. Inside was a tiny brass key and a note. First Midwest Bank Box 214. My coffee went cold as I stared at it. The bank branch was a few miles away, the kind with bulletproof glass and polite smiles. I took a number and waited, listening to the quiet beeps of the teller system and the rustle of paperwork. The woman at the counter glanced at the key and nodded. Safety deposit boxes are downstairs. Box 214 was small, unassuming. Inside were three things: a folded letter, a copy of the trust documents, and a manila envelope labeled "If Evan Pushes." My hands shook as I opened the letter. "Frank, if you're reading this, it means I was right about Evan. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but I need you to be strong. Everything is set up to protect you, but only if you don't give in. Read the trust. Call Thomas, and remember you are not a guest in your own life." I had to sit down on the little bench in the vault. My chest felt tight, not with fear this time, but with something closer to gratitude. Marjorie hadn't just planned for my comfort. She'd planned for a fight. Over the next few days, I stayed busy. Too busy to feel sorry for myself. I spent hours at the public library, the quiet broken only by the whir of the copy machine and the occasional cough. I read about life estates, about trusts, about forfeiture clauses. I didn't become a lawyer overnight, but I learned enough to understand one thing clearly. Evan's power only existed if I handed it to him. He didn't like that. The calls started on the third day. First polite, "Frank, let's talk like adults." Then irritated, "This arrangement isn't practical." Then angry, "You're holding my money hostage." I let every call go to voicemail. On the fifth day, he showed up. I was in the motel parking lot loading a bag of groceries into the truck when I heard his voice behind me. "You really like this place," he said. "Classy." I turned slowly. He was leaning against his car, sunglasses on, jaw tight. "What do you want, Evan?" He gestured toward the truck. It's part of the estate." "It's titled to Marjorie," I said, "and assigned to me." He stepped closer. "You don't need it. You're not going anywhere." Something in his tone made my stomach knot. "I'm done talking," I said. He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You're making a mistake." "I already made one," I replied, "thinking you cared about anyone but yourself." His smile vanished. That night alone in the motel room, doubt crept back in. I opened my laptop and started drafting an email to Beck. "Maybe we can simplify things." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed it. Instead, I opened the manila envelope labeled "If Evan Pushes." Inside were printed emails, notes, dates, evidence Marjorie had quietly saved, proof Evan had tried to pressure her to change the will while she was still alive. I exhaled slowly. He'd crossed the line. And he didn't even know it yet. The courthouse in Will County hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there years ago for jury duty. Same hard benches, same faint smell of old wood and floor cleaner, same nervous energy humming in the air. This time, though, every step I took down the hallway felt heavier. People from town were there. I recognized faces, neighbors, a guy who used to sit 2 rows behind us at church, even Mrs. Kaplan from the hardware store. Word travels fast in places like Plainfield. When someone with money loses control, folks notice. Evan was already inside the courtroom when I entered. He looked different. Still sharp, still polished, but strained. Like a man wearing a suit a size too small. He didn't look at me at first. When he did, his eyes were cold. "You really want to do this?" he muttered as I passed him. "I'm not the one who filed," I said quietly. He snorted. "You could have settled." I took my seat and said nothing more. When the judge entered, the room rose and fell as one. Papers rustled. A cough echoed from the back row. I folded my hands together and waited. Evan's attorney spoke first. He painted a picture of an elderly widower, confused by grief of a trustee abusing discretion, of a son unfairly restricted from his inheritance. He talked fast, confident, smooth. I listened without reacting, just like Beck told me. Then it was our turn. Thomas Beck stood, adjusted his glasses, and spoke in the same calm voice I'd come to trust. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is not about control, it's about compliance." He laid out the facts slowly. The life estate, the trust structure, the monthly distributions Evan continued to receive without interruption, the clear language granting the trustee discretion. Then Beck shifted gears. "Section 9 also includes a forfeiture clause," he said, holding up a document, "one that becomes relevant when the beneficiary engages in harassment or intimidation." Evan shifted in his seat. Beck began reading dates, times, quotes, voicemails, emails, witness statements. My heart pounded as Evan's own words echoed through the courtroom, threatening, dismissive, cruel. The room stirred. I saw heads turn, murmurs ripple. "This is out of context," Evan snapped, half standing. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Pierce." Beck wasn't finished. He presented the printed emails Marjorie had saved, messages Evan sent while she was still alive, pressuring her, pushing, asking her to fix things so the money wouldn't be tied up. The judge's expression hardened. Evan stood again, his composure finally cracking. She was sick. She didn't know what she was doing. "That did it." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Pierce, one more interruption and you'll be removed." Evan's face flushed, his jaw worked. For the first time, he looked scared. Beck concluded quietly. "By his own actions, Mr. Pierce triggered the forfeiture clause. Discretionary distributions are suspended until further notice. Trustee authority remains intact." The room went silent. Then the judge spoke. "I find no abuse of discretion," she said. "In fact, I find the trustee has acted with restraint." She glanced at Evan. "Your motion is denied." A collective breath released from the benches. Evan's chair scraped loudly as he stood. "This isn't over," he said, his voice breaking. The judge didn't look at him. "Court is adjourned." People stood. Whispers erupted. I stayed seated for a moment, my legs unsteady. Outside the courtroom, Evan caught up to me. "Please," he said, the word barely recognizable coming from him. "I'll do anything." I met his eyes. For the first time, I saw him clearly. "No," I said. "You'll do what your mother asked." I walked away. I went back to the house on a Tuesday morning. Not with police, not with movers. Just me, the old Ford, and a set of keys Thomas Beck handed me after the ruling keys Evan had never bothered to return. The front door opened the same way it always had, with a soft creak at the hinge. The smell inside stopped me cold. Lemon cleaner, faint coffee, the ghost of the life Marjorie and I had built one ordinary day at a time. Sunlight came through the kitchen window and landed on the table where we used to sit every evening, reading mail, arguing about groceries, planning nothing in particular. I set my suitcase down and just stood there. For a long time. The house felt quieter than it ever had, but it didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt like it was waiting for me to decide who I was going to be next. I walked through each room slowly, not rushing, touching the backs of chairs, the door frames I'd measured and repainted myself. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and found one of Marjorie's sweaters still hanging there, lavender worn thin at the cuffs. I pressed my face into it and let myself breathe her in one last time. In the kitchen, I took the small cardboard box from the truck and set it gently on the table. Marjorie's recipe cards, her handwriting, her notes. I wiped the grime off the lid with a dish towel and put the box back where it belonged. That afternoon, I called Evan. He answered on the second ring. His voice was flat, tired. "What do you want?" he asked. "I'm giving you 30 days, I said. "That's fair." A pause, and the money. You'll keep receiving the basic monthly amount, I said. Nothing more until the court says otherwise. He exhaled sharply. You're enjoying this. I thought about that for a moment. No, I said, I'm surviving it. He didn't say anything after that. Neither did I. We hung up, and for the first time since Marjorie's funeral, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not victory. Relief. Over the next few weeks, I settled back into the rhythms of the house. Morning coffee at the same counter, evening news murmuring in the background. Small repairs I'd put off while life was falling apart. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and quiet apologies. Mr. O'Rourke shook my hand and said she was a smart woman. He was right. Marjorie didn't leave me money. She left me dignity. She left me a way to stay standing when someone tried to erase me. I thought about Evan sometimes, about how easily greed had hollowed him out, about how quickly love can turn into entitlement if you let it. I didn't hate him. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that getting older doesn't make you useless. It just means people expect you to step aside quietly. You don't have to. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is read the fine print, hold your ground, and refuse to disappear. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been dismissed, pushed aside, or told you didn't matter anymore, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on your own worth. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, consider sharing it with them. Thank you for listening. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, you know where to find me.